Hi, everybody. Today on the Latched Mama podcast, we are talking with Joy, who is a licensed clinical social worker who focuses primarily on perinatal mood disorders. We are kind of talking about how she landed where she is, why she practices the way she does, how to really kind of pinpoint the difference between baby blues and postpartum depression and anxiety, and some fantastic coping skills and tools that she teaches her clients. Hope you enjoy it. You're listening to the Latched Mama podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Wirt, business owner and tired mom of 5. Join us each week as we talk about pregnancy, nursing, parenting, and all things motherhood. So, hi, Joy.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay.
That's kind of an open-ended question.
Yes. Well, I am Joy, social worker. That is what I do 2 of the days of my week. Well, actually, sometimes it feels like every day of the week.
Absolutely.
But with my own family, I have 3 lovely feral children.
Anybody who also calls their children feral is like very, very close to my heart. Joy's kids show up here at the warehouse and I'm like, oh, I feel like my kids are here. It's great.
Mm-hmm. I usually describe them as delightfully feral.
That's good. That's a really nice way to put a positive spin on it.
Mm-hmm. Strengths-based approach. Social workers are all about a strengths-based approach. So yes, I have them. One is 7, one is 4, one is 1. And we are just living our life trying to, have ourselves a good time and learn all the things. I have a lovely partner of over 10 years and together we're working as a team.
You homeschool your babies too?
I do homeschool. Yes.
I'm telling you, Joy shows up here and I all of a sudden feel like my life is a little bit less chaotic, or maybe our chaoses are together. It's nice. It's good stuff. So tell me a little bit about why you chose to practice what you do. Did you always want to be in the mental health world, or?
Yeah, so not entirely. I started an undergrad in political science and international relations.
Wow.
Yeah. And then grew very disenchanted by that. So I was a senior in college who decided she didn't want to do what she'd been majoring in for years. And that was like, oh, great.
Sure.
This is
so you were
good.
you're getting ready to graduate and you're like, not so much anymore. Okay, good.
But I got introduced to social work, and social work seemed to be focusing on the people that I felt like we were often talking who gets left behind in the political process. So I went to grad school for social work.
Where'd you go?
VCU.
You were here? Okay,
yeah,
cool.
Here in town. And I thought I would probably go into something like community organizing. That was kind of macro level. But life tends to have other plans. I didn't study the macro track in graduate school. I went for the clinical track because I thought, I have this political science background. Let me get some of the clinical background too. And then as life would have it, I just kept getting clinical jobs. Because when you're a young grad student, you often just need whatever job they're offering you. And I ended up loving it and started to work primarily with children and getting trained in play therapy and attachment-based therapies, expressive therapies. And as I did that, you're seeing all these struggles that children have, but coming to understand how much of that comes from the family system and the struggles that the parents are having.
You didn't have any kids yourself at that point? Okay.
No. And at the same time, kind of parallel to that, I had a friend that started to kind of introduce me to birth work and some of the justice issues happening in maternal health and maternal mental health that I just had never been aware of. My friends didn't have kids. I didn't have kids. And so about a year later, my partner ended up, for the holidays, his gift to me was he signed me up for doula training. He said, I think you should do this.
That's awesome.
So I did that, and it was life-changing in terms of the education. And I didn't immediately start practicing as a doula, but just bringing even that information into my clinical practice made me, again, pay more attention to the parents. How are they doing? And then over time, I did start doing doula work. And again, just seeing that, like, can we support women, birthing people, families in that pregnancy and postpartum period? And just like that helps everyone. It helps them, it helps their children, it helps the whole community. And so I did that for several years. I eventually moved into community mental health, where I was getting to work with adults more, but still not kind of, by that time, I was just really wanting to work with pregnant and postpartum people. And so after a few years in community mental health, and by that point I'd had 2 children, so I was understanding even more like the mental health aspect of parenthood.
How were those experiences? Did you use what you had learned kind of in your doula training and what you had learned practicing to make sure that you had the support or the better?
Yes. So, I mean, it's always humbling to like be the person that's like needing the help, right?
Absolutely.
But my first pregnancy was unplanned, right? So like 50% of pregnancies in the United States are. So it was a surprise. It was soon a pleasant surprise, but it still just took us on a different track. It sped up plans, you know. We thought we'd be married for over 5 years and all this stuff before we started having kids. And I pretty soon was having my own like mental health struggles. Like when we talk risk factors, I certainly had some, like especially a long genetic history. And so I did seek out really supportive care, what I thought would be supportive.
While you were pregnant? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Some of that didn't go so well. And so I had kind of a strange experience. So when I was pregnant with my oldest, my son, I was misdiagnosed with HIV during the pregnancy.
Holy moly.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have weird blood.
Okay.
So like on like that main screening.
So how long before, I assume that they recheck? Is that?
Mm-hmm. So they brought me back in. They rechecked. I was positive again.
Okay.
And so then they had to send me to a specialist.
Was this an OB practice or?
I was with a midwifery practice that no longer exists here in town. Was planning a birth center birth. And it just wasn't handled very well. It took about a month to get into the infectious disease specialist. So that's kind of a month of anxiety.
Did you go down a rabbit hole at that point? I mean, were you like, okay, so I have HIV, you know, what are the percentages that I'm going to pass this on? Like, is that where you were, or did you live in kind of denial during that time?
It was a little bit of both. There was a lot of just like fear and mourning, like, because, you know, there's certain things I had hoped to breastfeed my kids. And so if you are HIV positive, it is passed through breast milk. So that's just something you would not be doing. So I was already feeling like this preemptive loss of things I had hoped for, and just like loss of my health, or like, could I have given this to my partner? Like, what is going on? But through that, turns out I just have wonky blood. I don't have HIV. Was like this intro to just like high stress, high anxiety, needing more support, not feeling like I was getting it. And so, I mean, I'm thankful that I had the doula training already, that I felt just really comfortable, thus leaving that practice and going somewhere else to get more support. But, you know, that was one complication. Like, life just happens while we're pregnant. And with all those hormones happening, it just can make things so much harder. So, like, we got through that. It was tough, right? But then there was, like, this whole component throughout my postpartum journey of just, like, mourning the loss of my mother, who I had lost as a teenager. And we, you know, mourning is never done, right? And when we hit different life stages, it's like we have to mourn again. And so certainly my first postpartum experience was very like clouded by that grief of not having my mother there.
Absolutely.
Looking back, I can see ways where I was depressed, ways where I was very anxious, and just kind of was trying to like forge on and like white knuckle through it.
Yeah.
Right? Like that transition back to work full time was really hard. But there was a lot of pressure. I was like the primary source of income for our family. So like there weren't really other options. My husband was in college at the time. And so just a lot of anxiety. Mostly, I mean, I mostly present with anxiety. There was some, I think, just normal postpartum stress of adjusting to parenthood that kind of maybe presented with some depressive symptoms, but my main struggle has always been on the anxiety end of the spectrum.
So you had studied it at that point. You were a doula. You had dabbled in it a little bit in terms of practice. Were you surprised in general with just how hard the postpartum is? Because I mean, you can learn about it, I found, and you can read articles and you can be prepared, but until you're actually in the trenches with those hormones, it's surprising to me almost every single time just how much it changes just about everything.
Yeah. I mean, it comes for everyone, right?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
Those hormone changes are going to hit everyone, and they are intense. And just the adjustment, especially to the first child, in terms of that transition you have to make in your changing identity, mourning what your life used to be versus what it is now. It's so much to try to do. And you're right, like you can't know until you're in it. Like absolutely. I always advocate for expectant parents to do as much education as they can in planning for the postpartum period, but like that's good, but it's never going to get you all the way there. Absolutely. To like everything just goes 100% smoothly.
So you came out on the other side of that. Did you change how you were practicing at that point, or did your life take a different turn? Or
well, I will say the one thing that time that I think made such a difference in my mental health, my mothering journey, what also like started to get me even more interested in working with pregnant and postpartum couples, families, was that I found a supportive like mothering community. Probably about 7 months postpartum. I had heard, that there was like this mothering circle that meets in town and you should go check it out. And normally I worked that night of the week, but finally I just went and told my boss I need to switch my nights. I need to do this thing for me, right? Which is one of the hardest things for new moms to like say, I'm going to do something for myself.
Absolutely.
But it's so good to do, right? Yeah. We need to do these things. And I was in that group for several years, like once a month. And it became just such this place of non-judgment and support and being able to get advice and hear other people's experiences and have things be normalized. And it was just this place too where like, no, it wasn't a competition.
It wasn't a Facebook group.
It wasn't a Facebook group. And it wasn't like we have to pretend like things are nice or easy, right? Like people were real there about like the really hard parts, or that sometimes our kids are terrible and we don't like them very much, or we feel like this distance with our partners, or, just in-laws and parents and all the stressors. So it was just a wonderful support and just got me thinking about the power of women supporting other women in the parenting journey.
That's incredible. I mean, definitely one of the reasons why, we're trying to do what we do with Latched Mama is just try to touch as many people as we can. But I don't think that there's anything better than that face-to-face, communication and hugs and, really truly being able to be real without, getting judged or something like that you see so much on social media and stuff. So,
yeah.
So now you practice and you've had a couple more kids, but you focus primarily on helping women through this stage. Tell me more about that.
Okay. So, at least 1 in 5 women is going to struggle at some point throughout her pregnancy or the postpartum period with some sort of mood or anxiety disorder. It's like the number one complication of childbearing. And some of that, there's just so many risk factors that goes into it, but that's hundreds of thousands of women, right? And like in the Richmond area where we are alone, like that's 15,000 or so women a year give birth. If like 1 in 5 of those women are struggling,
yeah,
that's a lot of women.
Absolutely.
And we have, thankfully, like in our community, we have a lot of resources for like birth support and doulas and postpartum doulas. But a few years ago, we didn't have that many therapists that were working primarily on this issue. There was a few that were kind of like trailblazers and really working here for several years. And I'm really thankful in the last just 3 years, we've probably tripled the amount of therapists that are working in this area. But we're just trying to get women, couples, partners in the door and just give them tools and give them like a safe place to come and get support and, just begin to have that recovery process.
So do you want to talk a little bit about what a perinatal mood disorder is and just kind of educate us a little bit on, just some things that are kind of a normal adjustment versus something that, may benefit a little bit from help and support and therapy or something.
Okay, sure. So let's start with kind of like what is the normal end of the spectrum. So most women are going to experience some postpartum stress. And that can include just, again, I mentioned a little earlier, but like we're having to deal with this like changing identity. I sometimes describe it as like if our identity was a shelf where we have things on the shelf, like I was a partner, I was a social worker, I was a very reluctant runner, I love to read and, whatever. And then you become a mother and it felt like that came in and was so big it knocked everything off the shelf.
Yeah.
Right? And so women need to wrestle with that, right? Like especially, if you're working outside of the house, like you've spent years or months like in an office and now you're sitting at home, hopefully because you have some sort of maternity leave, but like that's a big shift. And so it takes time for motherhood to start to feel like it shrinks down to like pull those other things back up onto the shelf.
Such a good analogy. It's so true. And I think that especially as you go on to have more kids, you're aware that it's going to happen. And I almost can say like, almost visualize like, okay, this time, this is where motherhood's going to fit, but there's still going to be a couple inches on each side. And I'm going to still try and keep the great partner and great business owner up there too. Yeah. But I know every time it's going to knock everything down for a little while. And just to be prepared for that is hard, especially the first time, because you probably don't understand the magnitude of the change that's about to happen.
You don't know, and you also don't know what the other side looks like, right? Yeah. Like, thankfully, now, I mean, you are a veteran of this. You know that eventually motherhood does shrink down, that you can pick stuff back up off the shelf. You've also mourned the fact that some of those things you're not ever going to pick back up on the shelf, right? Yeah. And you're just going to choose new things that come up.
Absolutely.
Right? So, like, almost all women are going to go through that struggle, right? They're going to go through some times of grief, and I really work to normalize grief. We view grief sometimes in like a really negative light, like it's a sign that something's wrong, but truly it is a part of life, right? And so it is healthy and okay to mourn what life was like pre-kids, and for your partner as well, and to sometimes just join around it, right? Like before, you used to be able to be spontaneous and you could stop at the store on the way home from work and like grab stuff and not think that like your boobs were going to explode because, you've timed your pumping to like when to get home at work and like nurse your kid.
Yeah.
You're driving around on a Saturday and you've been up since 6 a.m. and you see people lined up for brunch and you're just like, who are these assholes? Like just rolled out of bed and decided to like go to brunch, right? Like, those days are long gone. Like you mourn.
Yep.
You mourn those things. And then we struggle like in the postpartum time with like this idea of like the perfect mom. Like we live in this day and age of like the perfect mother. Yeah. Right. And there's like a think piece on the internet for every parenting choice you could ever make.
Every single one with like the nice like black and white photo of the mom hugging the baby or kissing him goodnight. It's every single time you scroll through Facebook. Letter to my firstborn, or today was the last time I breastfed, or today you're off to school, and it's like for crying out loud. Like just there's emotion everywhere.
And it makes it really easy to start comparing, right? And to feel less than. And so social media, like especially when we're sitting there with the baby, we spend a lot of times on our phone, and that can just kind of fuel this comparison. And so
Yeah, I remember with my firstborn, he was super colicky, and I would go online and I would look at these Facebook articles, and it would be like, oh, today I mourned that, you're not co-sleeping anymore, or today I mourned this, or a letter to my firstborn. And I remember, even probably to this day, I have been so excited for every milestone he's hit because he's become more mature and more control of his emotions and stuff. And I just remember feeling so guilty that I wasn't cherishing those moments when the internet told me I was supposed to be cherishing them all.
Yeah.
But I wanted to just be moving forward. I wanted to hit fast forward. And I knew that that was okay. But at the same time, I felt a little bad about it, you know? And it's just like there so much of what we see every day on the internet is telling us we should be feeling differently, or, we should be, making the Pinterest cookies that we see online and stuff like that.
Yes.
So it's fascinating. But.
Yeah. So that's just like kind of normal struggles that sometimes brings people into therapy, right? Because they're just struggling with the adjustment. What is happening here? This is really hard. And so sometimes that's what therapy in the postpartum period looks like, is just helping people give voice to that, to normalize it, to say, yeah, that's okay. Like, you're doing a great job. Like, I often talk with couples about, or especially moms, about the line, like, good for you, not for me. Like, so much of like, once you're a parent, is you're going to see all this stuff and you just have to be like, good for them, not for me. Yeah. Right? Like, you're breastfeeding your child until they're 7 years old. Sure. Good for you, not for me. Like, you decided from day one you weren't going to. Sure. Good for you, not for me. Like, with so many things. Absolutely. In terms of parenting. But then for some women, well, and let me back up. The majority of women will have some sort of baby blues. And so that means that for up to 2 weeks postpartum, because of all of those hormonal shifts that are happening and the lack of sleep, that we get teary about things, right? Sometimes it's a sad teary. Sometimes it's a happy teary. Like, oh, I'm just so thankful that we're all here together. Or, I'm watching this commercial and boy, like, it really got me in the heartstrings. But we're easily overwhelmed. Our mood's just kind of up and down. And that is normal, right? Like, often we just need a good cry. Like, crying is so good for us. Yeah. Right? Like, I mean, we don't want to cry all day long, but when you cry, literally stress leaves your body through your tears. Like, we expel cortisol, one of our stress hormones, through our tears. So
it's so funny.
It's okay to cry.
Joy and I share a midwife, and I feel like she always calls after a baby on a certain day. It's like the day your milk comes in. I never want to talk to her. And I'm like, voicemail, voicemail, voicemail. And I don't answer her text. Don't want to talk to you, and she's very dear to me, but I don't want to talk to her that day. But I have learned that if I do talk to her, because I know I'm going to cry, and I cry, oh my God, you feel so much better. It's fascinating to me. It's just because, it's like this, for people who don't necessarily like to be emotional or show vulnerability, which I am one of them. It's fascinating to me that it actually does have an almost physical change of your body. Like, it does. It's fascinating.
You're losing some of the stress.
Yeah. I don't know. It's cool.
So, like, we're just often going to need to have our cry during that time. However, beyond that, right? Like, we're looking, especially in the first 3 months is when it's most common for a mood or anxiety disorder to kind of pop up, but you're just still really tearful all the time. Feeling sad, maybe starting to feel kind of hopeless. You're not really feeling like you can enjoy things. You feel very easily overwhelmed. Doesn't get talked about enough that we can get really irritable and angry, or sometimes feel ragey, right? Towards ourselves, towards our babies, towards our partners. If we have older children, I try to work with moms to prepare them. Like, you will probably never have been as mad at your toddler as you are in the postpartum period.
We were just talking about that yesterday. We had Dr. West on, a pediatrician, and we were talking about the fact that she was talking about adjusting, having another baby, and how your words matter to what you say to them. And I'm like, oh, absolutely, absolutely. But then I stopped her and I was like, but I can say this right now because I'm kind of through it. But those times you get so mama berry, you get so, and you get angry, and all of a sudden you're saying things with a tone to a younger child that was like your entire world, like 48 hours earlier. And it's like, who am I? Who have I become? Am I a monster? But so much of it is hormonal through the shifts in that beginning. So it's fascinating.
Yeah. So, Some women, they're having that. Some women with anxiety. So depression and anxiety are often together in the postpartum period. So like some women only have depression. Some women only have anxiety, but a large amount have some of both. And so those are also women that are just feeling very anxious, or they're worrying about things. Maybe they're starting to have these intrusive thoughts or images come into their head of like dropping the baby or somehow harming the baby or something bad happening to the baby. They're starting to feel very worried about germs, right? Like this is why sometimes having a baby in the wintertime puts you at greater risk for having postpartum depression or anxiety with the lack of sunlight, but also just like flu season. Like people are just like, there's germs everywhere.
How many times does a pediatrician tell you what happens if your baby gets a fever in the first 2 months? You know, don't let them get a fever. Don't let them get a fever. And I'm like, oh,
and then go to the ER. And then the thought of going to the ER too, you're like picturing all the germs that are there. So, you know, and especially like trouble sleeping. Sleep is also like a good barometer for like how you're doing. If your baby is asleep and you are laying in bed and you're tossing and turning and you just can't seem to turn off your brain, or you're waking up at night and then you can't turn off your brain, that is always something I'm looking at. Like, oh, that's not a great sign, right? Because you are so tired, you should be like, should be able to fall asleep. And so when women are starting to feel that way, that means that they have a medical condition, usually that needs to be treated as such, and get some help and support in it.
And it's okay.
It is okay. And it's treatable, right? And it's not something ever that women have done or not done, right? Like women can feel, again, guilt, like, oh, I should have prepared more, right? Or, you know, I've even heard from partners like, well, she's had anxiety for years. Why didn't she do more work before now to be more okay during this time? And it's like, whoa, like you could do all the preparation in the world and still have this happen, right? Like you can't, there is no such thing as 100% prevention.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you feel comfortable sharing maybe some of the tools that you kind of arm moms with as they, you know, kind of explore life as being a mom and stuff? Is that?
Yeah. So let's see. In the early days, especially when people come in, one of the first things we look at is sleep hygiene. Okay. And so our sleep is so fundamental to our mental health, right? Like even for women that had no history of anything, if you took anyone off the street, not even postpartum, and you compromise their sleep for 30 days, they will start showing clinical signs of depression.
It's fascinating.
So, I mean, and there's so many struggles with sleep. So we start looking at, and I should back up. Before I do sleep hygiene, we do a lot of work on validating their needs. Okay. And that we're going to look and try to give you things that you need, right? Because I think as women in our culture, often like the taboo thing is to be a needy woman, right? Absolutely. Like on the list of things to be as a woman, it's like above all else, do not be needy, right? Like
so ridiculous.
It's like the Scarlet N, right? Like
you can't be needy.
Don't be needy. And it's such crap, right? Like absolutely. It's just such crap. Like we do need things. And we have a culture that like often is focused on the baby, and we're not checking in on the mom, and we're not checking in on the partner, and how are y'all doing? So sometimes it's just like letting them have permission to like, you matter, right? Absolutely. And then we start looking at, okay, let's talk about your sleep. You know, let's talk about getting on the same page with your partner. And so often I ask them to bring their partners in. I mean, some partners already are coming in. Sometimes partners are the ones that actually contact me, right? Because for some women that are so depressed or so anxious, like those phone calls or those emails, the back and forth can cause so much stress that they just don't even do it. So like that's a great way that partners can support moms, right? Or they bring them in. And so sometimes it's a meeting together, or we just like, let's make a complete postpartum care plan. Even if you're 5 months postpartum, we can still plan, right? Like, absolutely. How are you guys going to start getting sleep? I really advocate a no, like all or nothing approach when it comes to feeding. So like nighttime parenting is a 2-parent operation, and we're really looking for women to get a 4 to 5 hour stretch of uninterrupted sleep. as soon as possible and get that on a nightly basis. And so that usually means that one feeding is going to need to be taken over by partner if they weren't already doing it. And so, you know, that's where I go like all or nothing with feeding. Like if you have the milk, use the milk, but don't stress yourself out further.
Absolutely.
Right? Like it's okay to use formula for those feedings.
Yep.
Because mom needs to get rest, right? And babies need healthy parents more than they need breast milk, just to be frank, you know? And so we look at that, and then we start looking at like a lot of their thoughts, you know, and the things they're saying to themselves.
Because sometimes those, from what you said earlier, those sometimes can manifest themselves in such a way that they can't sleep. So they're getting this space away from the baby, but it takes them a little while to calm down the thoughts that are coming in.
Yeah. So sometimes if it's a lot of racing thoughts at night, instead of trying to get rid of the racing thoughts entirely, because that often leaves women feeling like a failure, like they can't get rid of them, we just try to make a space for them. So like some women will try having like setting a timer for their worry time, right? And like writing in their journal all the worries, right? And then when the timer goes off, they stop writing the worries. Maybe they write a response to the worries, like I hear this, but here's what I'm going to do about this, right? Like, is this worry something, a productive worry that I could do something about? Is it something I need or want to do something about, right? Like, maybe they write a response, and then we go towards like, all right, now let's drink a cup of tea, or let's listen to a guided meditation, and now let's try to go to sleep.
Okay.
Right? And sleep however you can. So like the postpartum time, we are trying to survive. And I also work with moms like, what you're doing right now is not the rest of your life. But if you need for those 4 or 5 hours to go sleep in another room, that's what you do. Right? Do you need to put in earplugs? Do you need to move the monitor to the other side of the bed so like you're not watching it? Do you need to tell your
partner that, hey, you know what? For a little while, you need to sleep in the guest room. Like, I mean, we're 4 months postpartum, but my husband knows if I am asleep and the baby's asleep and he thinks in any way whatsoever he's going to wake one of us up, he goes to the guest room. And I think our marriage is great. And that's okay right now. Because he knows if I don't sleep, all the balls start to fall from there. I mean, it's just, it is what it is. So. Yeah.
And with multiple children, like partner's biggest role often then turns towards like the older children.
Absolutely.
Right? Because toddlers also don't always sleep through the night. 7-year-olds don't sleep through the night.
Oh, yes.
And so they kind of can take that.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
So we do some work around just tools like that. I mean, in terms of evidence-based approaches to therapy, we are looking at helping them kind of get more mindful. You know, I can't say enough about like guided meditations and starting a practice. Like there's so many apps, but like it literally changes our brain. If you and I scanned our brains today and then we did some sort of guided meditation for like 5 to 7 minutes a day, every day for 4 months, and we scanned our brains again, our brains would literally look different.
That's fascinating.
And so it helps.
What does it do?
I mean, it just starts growth in new areas of the brain, and it helps. Like right now, like our brains are just naturally wired towards negative thinking. Okay. You know, like from an evolutionary perspective, that's how we survived, was especially as parents, was like assuming dangers around every corner, right? Like the people that thought there might be a lion over there to eat me were people that were prepared to get away from the lion. The people that are like, oh, it's going to be fine, get eaten by the lion. Okay. Right? Yeah. And so like we tend to have a lot of like pathways in our brain that go towards negative thoughts, and those just stick faster. Like we have to think on positive thoughts for like at least 15 seconds for them to even start to stick the way a negative thought just sticks almost instantly. That's fascinating. Thanks, evolution. I mean, glad that we survived, like our species survived, but now we don't live in a time where like we need to be that hyper vigilant. Yep. Absolutely. At least here, like, you know, we're privileged where we live right now that we don't have to be so hyper vigilant. So it is about trying to help create more pathways in our brain that we go more to like, let me not take that thought and like kind of go down this rabbit hole of like, oh, if that's going to happen, then this is going to happen. And then this bad thing is going to happen, right? Like, oh, like for some women, like thinking from the anxiety perspective, it might be, oh, my kid's going to get sick, or what if my kid chokes, or starting solid foods? What would I do? Would I try to do the Heimlich? Would I call 911? And then like people are like rehearsing in their brain, like, where do they find their phone? Could they get to a neighbor? How fast would the ambulance get here? What's it going to be like in the hospital? What would our insurance? And like, you just like go into this full spiral. So we're doing tips and tricks in therapy to try to help women or partners like stop that cycle from going. We often spend a lot of time pushing back on the shoulds that women are coming into therapy with, right? Shoulds are, they're not good.
Yeah.
You know, you said that curse words are okay. This is my line in therapy that I use. I call shoulds pernicious little motherfuckers. Okay. Like they're not good.
Where are those shoulds coming from? I mean, are they coming from just culture, social media? Like, what do you... I assume there's probably more nowadays than there were. I'm sure there's some that are family-based or coming from parents. I mean, we were talking earlier about homeschool in general and having the parental pressure of, you know, is this the best decision for our kids and stuff like that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it comes from culture. I think it comes from also just our own hopes of like who we thought we would be as a parent or who we wanted to be, right? Like, you know, one of my shoulds was like, okay, shouldn't yell at kids, you know, it activates this part of their brain and then they kind of go into their own fight or flight. Do you know what I discovered? Because I used to work full time and now I homeschool. It's so much easier to not yell at your kids if you work full time outside of the home and you're not with them that much. And now that I'm with them, I'm like, it's been a great humbling experience, right? Yeah. But like shoulds have this, like they can bring on shame, right? And shame doesn't help us. It doesn't move us forward. It just like sticks us in this dark place.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, instead of shoulds, we talk about like, what do I want or what do I need? You know, do I want to do this thing? Do I need to do this thing? Like, and make a decision from there. But if you're making it from a should place, that often isn't going to serve us.
It's fascinating. It's so true though. Like, I mean, I can't imagine, you know, walking through life, you know, not having passion or a belief on why I'm doing something. And I feel like if you're doing something because you feel like either society or history tells you should be doing it, you do it, I think, probably with a lot less passion and love and commitment. And so many things in parenting are hard that when you take those elements away, they make them even harder. You know?
And if you think you should like this, right, or that it should be the best time of your life, because if you're pushing a kid through a grocery store at some point, someone who's older than you is going to tell you to enjoy every single moment because it goes by fast. Like, yes, it goes by fast, but like the pressure that I see women feel, like I thought I was supposed to love this and I don't love it and I feel so bad. And it's like, it's okay. Also, some of us don't like certain stages.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's okay to not like newborns or the toddler stage very much. Like we hear from parents all the time that a lot of them don't enjoy the teenage years as much. Like it's okay to not like every stage.
And it's okay at the end of the day to not have liked your kid that day. Like, I mean, I have those days where I'm like, wow, like that was just not an enjoyable day. Like you're being nasty to me. Like I'm trying to, you know, be kind to you. And, you know, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay not to be incredibly infatuated the moment you meet your baby too. I've learned that as well.
Yeah.
Like, you know, we think that we're going to have this overwhelmingly strong connection. And, you know, sometimes it takes time and, you know, it takes time to wait for that first smile and those times to get to know each other for sure. Cool. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
This has been awesome. Will you come back? Can we dig a little deeper?
Yes.
Cool.
On that last thought, we got to be gentle with ourselves.
Absolutely.
Right? Like when we have bad days, okay, we'll try again, right? Like not get into that because today was bad. All days are going to be bad. This didn't go the way I wanted it to. It's never going to go the way I wanted to. Like just...
Or it didn't go the way that social media said it was supposed to go. Or, you know, I finally get to bake cookies with my toddler who can stand up and help, but it was an absolute disaster. You know, there are moments I think that we build up in our brains to be these magical, magical moments in parenthood. And maybe we look back on them a few months later and we look at the pictures and we do remember them as magical. But in the moments, they're terrible.
Yeah.
They're overwhelming. They're not what we pictured them to be.
We're stress sweating and like being
Yeah.
like, oh no, don't pour that into the batter now. Or
I try and remind myself, like I'll look back on pictures from a vacation and I'll be like, oh, that was such a cool time. But then I try and remember how I was feeling actually that day. And I was stressed because we had to pack the kids up and we had to make sure there were snacks and somebody was melting down. But those aren't the pictures you look back on.
Yeah.
You know, it's all just fascinating. I think it's just it's parenting in a different time.
Yeah.
Maybe we should talk about that sometime. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for
Appreciate
having
it.
me.